It's bizarre to think about someone having $2, $3, or $4 million and being scared to take 6 months off. There is a misconception that as long as I'm not working, I'll be happy.
How can retirees rediscover their dreams and find new passions later in life?
It wasn't the job that was the problem. And that can be a disappointing moment when you realize the things that you thought you would enjoy don't actually bring as much joy as you thought they would.
What are some of the key principles of living intentionally during retirement?
If you want to be a high performer in your career or in your life, take a mini retirement and cross some of those things off the list.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Your Retirement Planning Simplified. I'm Joe Curry, and today we have a special guest who is truly an expert on living intentionally and designing the life that aligns with your values, which is something we talk a lot about on this show. So I'm thrilled to welcome Jillian Johnsrud to the podcast. Jillian, how are you today?
Great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, happy to have you here. Excited to talk about living a life of intention, especially that a lot of our listeners have been grinding it out, sacrificing, saving. And so what we really want to make sure they're focusing on is not just retiring from something, but thinking about being more intentional with that next step in their life. So before we dive into all that, Jillian, can you just tell our listeners a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I am 42, but I started this kind of personal finance journey when I was 19. My spouse at the time and we had like $55,000 worth of debt. So slowly paying all of that off. We were saving 50% of our income and then became financially independent when I was 32.
Amazing.
So I've had 10 years on exploring how to enjoy life, how to make it meaningful, full of joy outside of just paid employment. And along these last 20 some years, taken a dozen mini retirements, which is something I'm really passionate about as a way to kind of test drive retirement and scale up these things that we think we will enjoy.
Amazing. There's a couple things right there that I want to touch on. Maybe we can just go right there. First, I think that people think this idea of retirement is like, I just have to work for 40 years and then I stop working. And then I just don't never work again. So I have to have enough money put away. Can you talk a little bit about what a mini retirement is? And just keep in mind, maybe like our listeners, a lot of them are going to be getting closer to, if not in retirement. So maybe thinking about it, I love how you just said like a test run, like maybe just talk about how they could use it as a test run for themselves.
Yeah. If you think of traditional retirement as a marathon, it's something that's going to stretch out for a long time. A mini retirement's more like a 5K. And I always find it fascinating if I would say to someone that's planning to run a marathon, oh, have you ever jogged before? Have you done running? They're like, no running. I just sit. And I'm like, oh, have you thought about maybe doing a 5K? Like if you're to prepare for this marathon? And they're like, no preparation. I'm just going to jump into the marathon. It'll be awesome. And, mile 11, mile 18, like, they get leg cramps, they're being carried off on a stretcher, like it doesn't go great. Because if you're doing something you've never done before, the first time might be rocky. There might be a little bit of a learning curve. And so the idea of a mini retirement is taking a month or longer to kind of practice in this very contained, safe, low risk environment. Practice your relationships, practice these hobbies, practice scheduling your time in a way that's meaningful and enjoyable to you.
I love that. So what would you say? So, let's just say that I'm approaching 60. I've been working in the same place my whole life.
Yeah.
And that actually makes a lot of sense, this mini retirement thing. But how do I, go to my employer and say, I'm going to take a month off or a couple months, whatever the plan is? Like, how do I approach that?
So I recommend if you want 1 to 3 months off, that's a good amount of time to try to negotiate because a lot of HRs and companies are set up to allow people to take up to 12 weeks off for various reasons. So they kind of have that administrative framework in the background. If you want 3 to 12 months off, oftentimes it makes more sense to separate from your employer, even if you have the understanding that you'll come back to that company as soon as you're ready. So with those conversations, I always encourage people to do kind of the mental and emotional labor. This is not something to throw on your boss's lap and make them figure out because their plate is full. They have enough things to figure out. So figure out, who could take your work? How could things be moved around? What would this look like? Start to problem solve it. And it sounds counterintuitive, but try to articulate those challenges that you think your employer might be thinking or feeling. Put words around that because it helps start this process that you want it to be very collaborative and creative. You want to work together to kind of come up with this plan.
Okay, that's great. And so let's just say that you come up with a good plan. You talked about a couple things like, work on relationships, some of these things. So if someone's able to, maybe again, they're getting closer to retirement, so they want to do this on a larger scale. Maybe they want to try like a year or something like that. What are some other things they should be thinking about during this time, and what can they be doing to prepare themselves for a future, more permanent retirement?
Yeah, so one of them is how to schedule your time. This is something that, especially in countries that are very work-centric, we don't get a lot of practice on. At 5, we go to school and our teachers kind of schedule our time for us and they tell us what to work on and what to focus on and what success looks like. And then we go to college and our employer schedules our time. For most of us, we haven't had large chunks of time that we were responsible. What should we focus on? What does success look like? And it takes a little bit of practice to do that. So I think that's a great thing to focus on, because there is a little bit of a misconception that as long as I'm not working, I'll be happy. As long as I'm not doing that thing, anything else would be better than that. And I think happiness is one part reducing suffering, but one part adding joy. Just reducing suffering isn't going to cut it. It's not actually going to create that happiness that you're looking for. So you need to find other activities that would actually create some of that joy and start to practice them.
Okay. And now you're an expert in this, and I know you talk about this, but if I get someone's like, okay, this is making sense. I really hadn't thought about retirement other than, I want to travel a bit more, or maybe there's some goals like that. But, what do people need to think about when they really start thinking about building the life that they want? And like, what are maybe some of the key principles of living intentionally during retirement?
The key principles. I would say looking at what it is that, that you value, that what brings you meaning. But like I've kind of said, practice some of those things, because oftentimes we have this song list. People are like, oh, no, I've got all that figured out. I have like 100 things I want to do. It's going to be amazing. I have too many things I want to do. But they haven't really had time to either start those things or to scale those things up. So they've never experienced what that would be like on a larger scale. For example, I had a friend who retired early, and he said, man, I had this huge list of things I wanted to do when I retired. I wanted to clean up my garage. I wanted to go to my nephew's soccer game. I wanted to learn Spanish. And it turns out it wasn't the job that was the problem. I actually didn't really want to do those things. And that can be a disappointing moment when you realize the things that you thought you would enjoy, learning to play guitar, having your grandkids over on a Sunday afternoon, don't actually bring as much joy as you thought they would. And so this is kind of a weird way to think about it, but sometimes I think about mini retirements is spreading out the disappointment. So you might have 50 things you want to do. Take a mini retirement and cross some of those things off the list. Like, actually, I thought that would be cool when I was in my 20s, and now that I'm in my 50s, it just doesn't do it for me anymore. That doesn't hold the appeal it once did, because once you cross those things off the list, you can add new things to the list that might actually resonate with you better.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. And that's something we talk to clients about as well. We've talked about it on the show is you might not know what your purpose is when you get to retirement, right? I think a lot of people put a lot of pressure on themselves when we start talking about this. Like, I need to find my purpose, and it almost feels too big. But one of your priorities, one of the things that you can do to set your routine is just to make part of that priority just trying new things and seeing what you like and what you don't like, right? Don't be scared to experiment.
Yeah.
Awesome. Now, your book's not actually out yet. Is that right?
It is available for pre-order, but it comes out in September.
Okay. So I got a sneak peek at it. So one of the things that I thought maybe we could touch on is you talk about how money can give people security and freedom, but sometimes maybe people skew one way or the other. So could you talk a little bit about that balance and what you mean by that?
Yeah, I think this is a little bit based on our personality, a little bit based on our childhood experiences. What's the function of money in our lives? And for some people, it is to just bring joy, and they will spend it in a way that brings joy as quickly as they receive it, because money's great at that function. And for other people, it really is about security. It's about stability. And they're really good at kind of storing all of those nuts away to create more of that sense of security. But it's a little bit tougher to use it to create joy and to have fun. And there can be this dichotomy that money can be for one or the other, but it's tough for it to be both, because especially if you're far on either spectrum, it can feel uncomfortable and unpleasant to use it for the other reason. But I think your most ideal kind of biggest, best life is when you can let money do both jobs, when you can use it for that security, but also for fun and freedom. You know, I see a lot of people, I kind of started writing in the FIRE movement. A lot of people put money away for that security, but to give them options and to give them choices. And so they could live more towards their values. And then they ended up with all this money and they still didn't give themselves permission to have that freedom. They still felt trapped by the security and the fear and the scarcity. And it's only it's bizarre to think about someone having $2, $3, or $4 million and being scared to take 6 months off, scared to walk away, scared to. I was at an event, and this is such a common thing. It sounds bananas, but it's so common. People will take a mini retirement. I think this person was taking, a year off, which is a huge financial investment. Like if you think about the lost income, it's a lot of money. But then they're nervous to take a $20 yoga class or spend $150 on an art class. And it's like you're already investing so much money by not working. Spend a little bit more to enjoy the time off.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I mean, we see that with retirees all the time. They've had this whole life of saving and sacrificing to get to where they are, but then to have that mindset shift to go from saving to spending is very difficult. Do you have any thoughts on how people can maybe shift that mindset a little bit?
Yeah, it is tough. I mean, I compare it to driving 80 miles an hour down the highway and then just popping that thing in reverse. It's a big transition. One of the analogies I use that sometimes can help people wrap their minds around it is, imagine if you booked a trip to Paris with your family, like a week-long vacation, and you've spent thousands on these plane tickets. You've spent $1,000 or $2 on this hotel. And then you get there after you've made this huge investment and you're like, yeah, we can't go to the Louvre. No, that's going to be $15. No, we can't go get a crepe. That's $4.50. No espresso. I packed instant coffee in our bags. You don't need to go get a coffee. You're already spending so much just to get there. You might as well enjoy the experience a little bit. And one of the tools that can help is to plan this out ahead of time. Plan out the budget ahead of time when you're not in this scared, dysregulated state. When you're still earning money, when you're still feeling confident, when your investments are still going up, create the budget. And then once those feelings of dysregulation, of fear, of scarcity start to bubble up, check back in with the budget. Are you actually on track? Are you spending like you planned to be spending? Are you underspending to try to hedge your bets? And how do you kind of at least go with the plan that you made when you were in a good mental space?
Yeah, that's great. And I think nowadays it's so much easier to do something like that because as a starting point, let's just say that you were going through the exact experience. You could literally just jump onto ChatGPT or something like that and be like, hey, here's what I'm doing. Here's where we're going to be. Here's how long I'm going to be there. These are the things I like. Create my budget for me on everything I might spend money on. So you could actually, it can save a lot of the legwork. And then you can have a better idea, like you said, before you go. At least now you know what you're getting yourself into. And then hopefully while you're looking at that in a, like you say, not in a dysregulated state, it might be a little easier to wrap your head around. I like that. That's great. Now, if we're thinking about, again, that person who's maybe they're 5 years out from retirement and they're thinking about, how do I just kind of push myself over the edge financially? You talk about 5 buckets. What are those buckets and how might listeners utilize some or all of these buckets to kind of give them another step forward with their finances?
Yeah, I think about the 5 buckets, and I always want to preface it is that you don't need all 5. Really, you just need 1 bucket, depending how much you have in there. But if you create a little bit of diversity, it can help if you like that sort of thing. So when it comes to mini retirement, the cash bucket is a real strong bucket. Just having, if your mini retirement is going to cost you 20 grand and you have 20 grand in cash, it's like perfect. You're done, you're set, go have your fun. But, people thinking about retirement, having kind of a stock market investment bucket, super useful for long-term goals. But then I especially encourage people who are thinking about mini retirements earlier in their career to start thinking about some of these other buckets because they long-term can be beneficial. And one of those is like a side hustle or part-time work. And this can be great going into a traditional retirement as well. If you have something that you enjoy that adds some different values to your life. It adds some purpose, it adds some community, some connection, some usefulness, and creates a little bit of cash. That's awesome. But also kind of real estate or passive income. And sometimes for people on a mini retirement, that can be as simple as if you're going to be gone for a year, maybe you rent out your house for the year that you're gone and you kind of supplement your income that way. And then for some people, it makes sense to start a business. That might be active, that might be passive, but having that other way to generate income. And then the bonus one is paying down debt. Like if you don't have those debt payments, that can be really helpful in keeping your costs low and increasing your savings rate.
Absolutely. Okay, that's awesome. So one of the things I think you talk about also in the book is like dreaming big, even as adults. How can retirees rediscover their dreams and find new passions later in life?
Yeah, I think there's a few different steps or different tools you can go through. One is revisiting things that maybe you set aside when you were younger. A question I often ask people, like if I'm going out to dinner with friends, because I'm super geeky, so I just ask really geeky questions to keep myself entertained. And one of them is, if given the opportunity, if it looped back around, what's a road that you might take again, if the opportunity presented itself? And I think that's one area to look at. Like, what's something that maybe you gave up because you moved across the country or because you had kids or because your work was demanding? But if you had the opportunity again, maybe you would want to try it. For me, this last year, I started doing social dance, specifically tango. Growing up, I grew up in a small town that had a lot of social dancing, and I always thought I would, and I never did. And I was like, hey, actually, I should revisit that. And it turns out I love it just as much as I thought I would love it when I was growing up. And so now this is like a huge part of my life. I have all these tango friends, and I travel and dance tango. So thinking about things that you've maybe set aside, but also one of the tools I think about is like, what's something that sparks curiosity when you hear people talking about it? Or it could even spark maybe a little bit of jealousy of like, well, that must be nice. If you kind of have that response, like look into, is there some element of that or some dynamic that is interesting and compelling to you that you could explore if you had that time and that energy to do so?
Yeah, that's so good. I love that. I love this whole conversation again around having a more intentional life based on your values and what's important to you, trying new things. So, as I mentioned, most of our listeners are going to be closer to retirement. That said, most of them also have kids who are going to be younger and getting started out. So, maybe you could talk just a little bit about your journey to financial independence and maybe some of the struggles and some of the things you learned along the way.
Big question.
Very big question.
um, yeah, like I said, I started at 19 and just by saving half. And that was, it's funny, that was a random piece of advice that some adult at church offhandedly said to me, they said, "Hey, you're getting married. Why don't you guys think about just saving one of your income? I'll give you some choices down the road." And I was like, choices? Ooh, I love that word. Choices? I love choices. And so we just started down that path. And I would say one of the bigger challenges when I was in my 20s was that wanting to fit in, but having a tremendous amount of social pressure to be similar to my peers. And it's really tough when you're in that early stage of the journey to do things that are very countercultural because you don't have the outcome yet. You're in the beginning of the process. Nobody around you believes this will work, and you don't have any evidence that it will work. And so you're kind of running on this like blind faith and a spreadsheet to hope that like this makes sense. And I remember I read, I think it was David Bach's like Smart Couples Get Rich. There was like a little chart in it. And I remember showing my best friend, like, this is the chart. It says if I save this much money, I'll have that much money. And she was like, yeah, I mean, maybe, I don't know. Like, it seems crazy. And so I think in those 20s and those early 30s, having some like-minded friends is so powerful. Having a community that's like, yeah, that chart is awesome. And you don't have the result yet, but you are getting there and it's going to happen. You know, I was just at an event and there were some people in their early 20s and they're like, am I doing the right thing? Like, am I on the right track? I'm like, yes, absolutely. Like, keep showing up, keep doing it. But it's really tough when you're in the early stages, when you're putting in all the work, but you don't really have the results yet. And then in your 30s and 40s, the demands just ramp up so much. The demands on your time and your energy and your focus, and burnout starts to kick in. And it can be tough it's tough to stay grounded and wait, is this actually the life I want to be living? Is this how I want this to look? Or giving yourself permission to make different choices and to do something different, like take a mini retirement.
So I love that. And how do you, because I think that people can easily go through 40 years of working without really stopping to think about, am I really doing what I wanted to do?
Yeah.
So you mentioned the mini retirement, but like, what's the trigger for you? Like, how are you able to get yourself to just kind of stop and reflect and think about, like, is this what I want to do? Obviously, the mini retirement is a good way to give yourself some more space and time to map that out more. But like, what got you to pull the trigger on the mini retirement in the first place?
You know, mini retirements are tricky in the same sense of you hope it's going to be valuable, but before you do one, you don't have any evidence. So you're kind of taking a leap of faith. And that might even be, you know, when I work one-on-one with clients, like before you jump into the mini retirement, try 4 days. Like, get out of your house, get out of your routine, try 4 days of like life planning exercises, because there's some questions that you won't get to the same answer if you're unloading the dishwasher while you're trying to ask it, versus if you've had like a 2-hour walk with your spouse and have been kind of mulling this over. In both of those scenarios, you're going to get to a different conclusion. One very superficial, typically, one a little bit more substantial. So practicing those smaller things, but I think about it like a timeout, like a sports timeout. I played basketball in high school, and nobody forgoes the timeout. Like, nobody forgoes halftime. No one's like, actually, we don't even need halftime. Like, we're hard, we're dedicated, we love this game, we're just going to play straight through. Like, everybody takes the halftime because you need the opportunity to rest. You need the opportunity to refresh, but you also really need the opportunity to reimagine what the second half of this game could look like. Especially if you've been down, if you've been behind, you need a moment to regroup and like emotionally, mentally imagine a different outcome to go back in strong. So I always encourage, like, mini retirements, they're not for the lazy, they're not for the undedicated, they're not for the disorganized. They take a tremendous amount of effort and planning and organization and courage and vision to execute this. Like, they're for high performers. And if you want to be a high performer in your career or in your life, like, take the halftime. pull it together and come back better and stronger.
Awesome. That's great. And so maybe before we kind of wrap things up here, and I'm going to give you a chance to let everybody know where they can find you, but if there was one piece of advice you had for someone who's approaching retirement, say within 5 years of retirement, what would it be?
I would do a month practice. Practice it, if nothing else, like to give yourself the taste of something good to look forward to, or to problem solve some of the stuff that might go wrong. In the book, I have like kind of 10 unexpected things that might happen in the journey. And one of them I call the messy kitchen, in that if you've been really busy, there were times when me and my former spouse were like super busy with our careers, and we would make dinner, we were tired, and we wouldn't clean the kitchen. We would say we do it in the morning, but we would run out of the house in the morning on our way to work, and we would leave the messy kitchen. And it didn't really bother us because we were at work all day and we didn't have to see the messy kitchen. And the break room wasn't messy, so it was fine. A mini retirement can be a little bit like, oh, now we're in the house and we can't avoid the messy kitchen. Like, all we can do is like, maybe we need to clean this up, or else we just have to stare at it all day long. So the mini retirement can bring some stuff up that you've been avoiding, and work is a fantastic distraction from dealing with our challenges in life. But the great thing is you take this mini retirement, you're like, oh, there's a couple challenges. You have 5 years before real retirement. You have 5 years to kind of sort through this, so that when you start your traditional retirement, like, you've dealt with the messy kitchen, and it really can just be a very positive experience.
Yeah, that's perfect. Awesome. All right, Jillian, where can people learn more about you, find your upcoming book, or anything else you want them to know?
Yeah, retireoften.com. Retire Often is the name of the book. I have a podcast, and I've got some free worksheets on there as well if you want to start thinking through some of this life planning, intentional living stuff.
Very cool. Thank you so much for joining us today, Jillian. To all of our listeners, thanks for tuning in. If you know someone who is approaching retirement, this would be a great episode to share with them. So thanks again, Jillian, and everyone else, until next time.
Thank you.